It's been nearly 6 months since Hamas attacked Israel, killing 1,200 people and kidnapping dozens more. Since then, Israeli forces have killed tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza, with the millions left behind displaced and cut off from food, water, and medical care. All of it has exacerbated tensions around the world, including on American college campuses. According to a new report from the University of Chicago, more than half of Jewish and Muslim students fear for their safety. GBH News higher education reporter and managing editor Kirk Carapezza spoke with several students in and around Boston. He joins me now, along with the author of the report, University of Chicago political science professor Robert Pape. Kirk, what did the students you were talking to tell you?
They're afraid. They're frightened. They're hearing chants like "from the river to the sea," Palestine will be freed. They're seeing acts of violence. They're not talking to each other. They're protesting, but they're kind of passing each other in the night. And I think what several told me is that we have a generation here that it's easy to forget that, these students were in middle and high school during the pandemic, right? And so for many of them, they're still emerging adults, right? They're not necessarily used to looking each other in the eye, having these difficult conversations about these really hot-button issues. But the Jewish students, some of them are concealing their identity. There's a survey out from a researcher at Tufts that finds a quarter of Jewish students say they need to hide their Jewish identity. That's double what it was in 2022. These students are, talking to each other, but they're not talking across differences. The Palestinian students that I spoke with, these activists are saying that they're being criminalized, they're being called terrorists. And they feel like they're being, while they're outspoken, they feel like their views are being mischaracterized.
Bob, what did your report tell us about how widespread these fears are?
Well, they're more intense and more widespread than we previously knew. We've conducted the first nationally representative survey of college students on this issue since October 7, and we specifically asked questions about anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, but also about how do they feel, and particularly do they feel in personal danger because of their beliefs related to the Israel-Palestine conflict that has flared up on October 7th and since. And what we discovered, as your intro showed, is that 56% of Jewish students feel in personal danger, 52% of Muslim students, and 16% of students who are not Jewish and not Muslim also feel in personal danger. And that last number, 16%, may seem small, but that represents over 2 million college students of the 16 million today. So that's this is really quite a widespread phenomenon. And as you just heard, independent of us, journalists have been now interviewing students, and they're finding just what we found in our report, because we didn't just ask students to check the box. We asked them if they felt in danger to say why. Give us a few sentences explaining why. And over 87% of the students who said they felt in personal danger explained it. And just as you heard, they're hearing these phrases, and the protesters may think they're peaceful phrases, but they're being interpreted as calls for genocide. And they're seeing acts of violence and acts of intimidation against students on campus. And this is simply scaring large swaths of the student body.
So it's, Kirk, I think one of the more striking parts of the story is we tried to get the students here on television, and they'd all refused to come.
Right, and as a reporter, I spent weeks building up the trust to get them just to go on the record and so that we could use their names, right? And some of these students have been doxxed, right? We featured a young Egyptian-American student who's Muslim, whose face was on the doxing truck at Harvard, and she expressed the lack of trust she has in the institution. Several of the Jewish students, didn't necessarily want to go on record at first. But yeah, I mean, part of the story, I think, is that they're not here tonight, right? They're not willing to go on live television and talk about this. There's a lot of fear, and I think a lot of this predates this conflict too. There's a survey out from the Knight Foundation that found in 2019 that found 2/3 of college students say that their campus climate precluded them from expressing their true opinions because they feared that it might offend their classmates. And I think what we're finding is, one professor told me we have these monocultures on campus, whether it's the whole campus or it's certain departments, and it's become antithetical to the whole mission of higher education, right, which is to have these very difficult conversations and to practice and teach critical inquiry. And that's, on some of these campuses, that's not happening.
Bob, is this a story about sort of people actually encountering anti-Semitism or Islamophobia in person, even violent one? Is this a social media story where incidents that are relatively rare get passed around to a remarkable extent? I can tell you personally, like, I hear about people asking me stories all the time and saying to confirm, so did this actually happen? What does it mean? And it's sort of what I get, that seems to go a lot through WhatsApp groups. So I observed that myself from Jewish and Muslim friends, some combination between, like, something has changed both in the, not just about the war, but sort of the willingness of people to express sentiments of Islamophobia or anti-Semitism in ways that probably would have been very surprising a generation ago.
Yeah, so some of this is about a rising context of anti-Semitism. So we also had a benefit. I did a study of anti-Semitism and support for political violence among American adults, 8,000 in the survey in the spring of 2023. So we were really able to look apples to apples to see the wider context in which the events of October 7 are unfolding and how they're being interpreted. And we can really say in the report that violent anti-Semitism, the tolerance of violent attacks against Jews, is increased by 13% among all American adults after October 7, and you're seeing some of the manifestations of that. However, there's a second point that we really discovered in this that we sort of knew it might be there because I've been studying political violence for 30 years. But what we discovered that was a big finding is there's a tragic misunderstanding at the heart of some of the campus fears. You see, we asked questions about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, this famous pro-Palestinian chant. And what we wanted to know is when you hear that chant, what do you think it means? And we discovered that fully 26% of college students, that's 4 million of the 16 million, think that chant means genocide of the Jews. That's a really big number, and that means they're hearing that as a call for genocide. Well, 66% of Jewish students are hearing that chant and thinking it's a call for genocide of the Jews, and about 2/3 of them are afraid as a result of that. Muslim students, though, it's only 14%. So what does that mean? It means there really are likely some genuine protesters using that chant that means something peaceful by it. But perception can become reality. Hearing that, understanding it as a call for genocide produces fear, even if that's unintended by the people making that chant. So what does this mean? This means there's a tragic misunderstanding, and this is something we can do something about, and do something about now by simply publicizing this information, letting people know that there's this misunderstanding, these different perceptions of the meaning of this phrase. One, a call for genocide, another, very peaceful outcome. What this means is student protesters can maybe think about a different chant, or they can follow that chant with something very quickly that means they don't mean harm to Jews or harm to anybody. And that also means we can do something to calm down these fears that don't require people changing their fundamental positions on the Israel-Palestinian conflict, or don't require the end of legitimate protest. It means that there's something that we can do that won't solve or calm all the fears, but we can start a process of calming fears. And if we can calm some fears, we may discover that will cascade and it will produce a general calming effect.
Well, I think we could keep talking about this forever, but I'm really glad we could get some real empirical data on what's happening and maybe have a way to take these tensions down that we're learning from this conversation. So Kirk, Carapezza, Robert Pape, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.